pleasure to see so many familiar faces, and it's an honor to be here with distinguished leaders and colleagues and friends, people like Randy and others who are stalwarts in the union movement. Leo and I were chatting before. I remember growing up in Buffalo, New York. Hey man, I look around the room, I see friends, and I get distracted. Other leaders in the labor movement, and there's so many wonderful people here. And when I was a kid, I would read the New York Times. I grew up in upstate New York, and the thing I remember most was, I think it was the Week in Review section. And every week there would be a column from Albert Shanker. And I have these two cousins who are in their 80s. They're beloved members of our extended family who were New York City school teachers. And when we get together with them, they would regale me with stories of Albert Shanker and what he did. And what I learned from that was it wasn't simply, and it's not unique to Albert Shanker and the movement that he helped build, but it's what I've seen in my interactions as a kid growing up in Buffalo, New York, a labor town. And it's what I see in my job now, and it's what I saw in local and state government, and is that Albert Shanker wasn't simply taking care of his members. He and his members, the UAW and their members, the AFT and their members, the NEA and their members, the AFL and their members are helping to build communities. We're all in this together. And that's what I learned, not only from Albert Shanker, but from all the remarkable interactions I've had the privilege of being a part of. There's one person I really would like to acknowledge that I just saw walking in, and that's Steve Greenhouse. I had a lot of conversations with folks at the Times, and when I learned of your departure, Steve, I mean, you are one of a kind, and we are a lesser media without you, and so I wanted to acknowledge you personally and say thank you, and I hope you will continue to be part of the discussion because your work is so important. The next Tuesday is the State of the Union, and as we prepare for this, the State of the Union is really an appropriate time for reflection, where we were, where we've come, and where we need to go. And I don't think I'm giving away any state secrets to tell you that the President's going to talk about where we've been, where we've come, and where we need to go. The 3 months before the President took office, we lost 2 million jobs in the United States.
2 million in simply the 3 months before. You now look and fast forward to 2014, 3 million jobs roughly were created. You look at even beyond that, we've had 58 consecutive months of private sector job growth, which is the longest streak in history, to the tune of roughly 11 million jobs. Last year was the best year for job growth since 1999. And last year we saw the biggest average drop in the unemployment rate since 1984. And what we're seeing, especially in the last year, is that the growth was very, very broad-based. The construction sector last month alone added 48,000 jobs. And these are good middle-class jobs. And so America's coming back. And the President's going to talk about that. And we have a lot to be proud of. We dug out of the worst recession of our lifetime. But we undeniably have unfinished business. And the President's going to talk about that unfinished business. And last week, we were together with our friends at the AFL and so many others to talk about the unfinished business of wage stagnation. And the challenge that we have, and the difference between 1999 and now, is that the growth that we were seeing in the late 90s resulted in greater shared prosperity. And the challenge for us moving forward is to build an economy that works for everybody. Bless you. And bless all of you for that matter. I don't want to single anyone out. It's not simply to build an economy that lifts some boats, but to build an economy that lifts all boats. And that's the unfinished business. And as much as we are making progress, I continue to meet folks who are still working to find that job. I meet other folks who haven't gotten a raise in years. And as you know, and people like Steve have reported on it, This phenomenon is not simply a product of the Great Recession. This is a decades-long trend. And this conference couldn't be more timely, because the conversation about how we build an economy that works for everyone requires us to have a level of introspection and a tough conversation with ourselves about what do we need to do. And there are many things that the president will be talking about next week, and you've heard him talk about it before: minimum wage and transportation infrastructure, immigration, and all those issues that are absolutely, positively, critically important to growing an economy that works for everyone. I want to focus on the issue that I think is really the centerpiece of today's conversation, and that is the issue of worker voice. Because I know that when you look at the history of America and the growth of the middle class, it didn't simply coincide by some fluke, but it was inextricably intertwined with a labor movement that was strong. And as a result, productivity and real wages went up side by side. There was a social compact across America. We are all in this together. There was the rejection of false choices. We don't either take care of our workers or take care of our shareholders. We do both. We create a virtuous cycle when we're all in this together. And over the last 30 years, productivity has continued to rise. The American workers are as ingenious and hardworking as ever, but real wages, as you know, haven't kept pace. And the issue of worker voice, as we move forward to have the conversation about how do we build an economy that works for everyone, is, I think, a centerpiece of what we need to discuss. And I think about where we were as a nation back in the early mid-20th century. We had a really great attachment to many institutions. People belonged to the Elks Club or the Eagles Club or the church, the labor hall, the bowling alley, the bowling club. Now we move to today, and we see a lot of folks who are bowling alone. And the question presented is, how do we build a movement when some of these structures have evolved, and when the order of the day for so many millennials is I'm on my gadget? And how do we build sustainable structures? And how do we acknowledge the headwinds? And the headwinds are undeniably formidable. State legislatures who are doing away unfairly and ill-advisedly, in my judgment, with collective bargaining. Hostile courts undeniably taking aim at the right to organize. Forces with great money who wake up every day. There was one person whose name slips my mind, although you know him well, who said, I wake up every day trying to figure out how to screw unions. That is not a paraphrase. That is a quote. And we have some in Congress who want to make sure that worker voice is limited. And the thing about it is, I come to you with an unbridled sense of optimism, because these voices and these headwinds are not new to America. You look back 100 years ago or so, and you had the Lochner decision. You had a hostile court who basically said laissez-faire, unbridled economics is the law of the land, even if it results in unsafe workplaces and people who don't want to, who don't get fair wages. We had what FDR called calamity howlers, who said, if we enact a minimum wage, it will be the end of the world as we know it. There was a wonderful movement that I found it very interesting. I think it was 1892, a really interesting movement where there was an effort to establish an 8-hour day for workers on federal contracts. Sound familiar? And there was a monthly trade journal, Manufacturer and Builder, that called this, quote, about as vicious a piece of demagogy that could be conceived. So, they didn't tweet it out back then. But these headwinds we have seen before. And we have always had the wind at our back and assets that we bring to bear. And that's what I see in this audience. Because I will tell you, one asset that we have is President Obama. He understands that change comes from the bottom up. He understands that the labor movement and American prosperity went hand in hand. He understands that we need to be deft and we need to figure out other ways to expand and ensure worker voice in America. And so that's a huge asset that we have. And I love my job in no small measure because I know this president gets it. And he understands that it's a false choice to suggest, as I said before, that we either take care of our workers or we take care of our shareholders or we take care of our customers. We went to the Ford Motor Company last week together because that's the story of labor and management working together. Ford and so many others in the Big Three had an existential crisis in the Great Recession. And what did they do? They worked together under a plan of shared sacrifice leading to shared prosperity, rejecting those false choices. And now you look at, for instance, the data on folks who work in unions. The average union member, the median income is about $200 more than a non-union member, and that doesn't include benefits. And we'll have more data in a couple weeks on that. The annual survey comes out the end of January every year. It's consistently shown that when you are able to work collectively, people benefit, and not at the expense of employers, in partnership with employers. So we have many assets. It starts out with President Obama. It continues with the various forces in this room and the ingenuity that you have brought to bear. People, not only leaders like Randy and Rich Trumpka and our friends at SEIU and others, but it's also the emerging leaders from worker centers who have figured out other ways to give voice to workers. And they have done so with such incredible deftness and success. And I am so glad that the MacArthur Foundation so acknowledged one such leader most recently. The Gupta family, by the way, as an aside, I just met the youngest member of the family. I just hired one of the other members of the family, and I want to meet the parents. Because do they have a slacker child? I haven't met one yet. And that's what gives me optimism about tomorrow, because we're seeing all of these emerging models. And by the way, what I also see in my conversations and travels is there are so many employers, large, small, and mid-size, who understand this as well. This is not an us against them strategy or an us against them challenge. I see so many employers who recognize that their workers are their most important asset, and that giving voice to workers not only helps workers, but it helps communities, and it leads to that virtuous cycle. So we may have many assets there as well. And that is why I leave you with, if you can remember one and only one thing, we're having this same conversation. There is undeniable headwinds, but make sure we understand history. I think Randy was a history teacher and taught, and she understands a little bit about law as well. And when you look at history, the arc of the moral universe bends toward those who seek to expand opportunity. The Lochner Court didn't become the law of the land. It was taken over because we came together as a nation. We're not celebrating George Wallace Day next week. We're celebrating Martin Luther King Day next week, because America understands that the arc of the moral universe bends not only toward justice, but toward people who seek to expand opportunity, create win-win scenarios, build virtuous cycles. And undeniably, we have work ahead of us. But we had work ahead of us 100 years ago, and we came forward in partnership. We had work ahead of us during the Great Depression, and we came forward, and we moved forward, and we moved ahead and built a virtuous cycle. We have headwinds now, and I have no doubt based on the people in this room, based on the president of this nation, based on virtuous business leaders that I meet every day, based on incredibly intelligent and strategic labor leaders that I work with regularity, faith leaders and others. I have no doubt that the arc of the moral universe will continue to bend, but we know it will not bend on its own. And that's why today is so important. And I hope, Steve, that you can brainstorm with us now that you're no longer employed by the New York Times, because we need to tell our stories as well and understand that there is a big machine out there that is working to tell a different story, to muzzle worker voice. And we need to counteract that, because that is a key to our success. So thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. I wish I could be here all day, because this is a conversation about the future of the middle class, how we build an economy of shared prosperity, how we get back to a truly virtuous cycle where rising tides indeed lift all boats. I am confident that we are on our way there, but I am confident that we have significant unfinished business, and under your leadership and with the spirit of Albert Shanker and Hillman's and other union leaders and other trade unionists in this room, we will succeed. Thank you for having me.